So the next episode of Dana White's Contender Series 2023 is going to be week number 7, and I'm looking forward to this card, especially the main event. I think that it should be a pretty good one, but overall, a very, very hard card to predict. We did manage to defeat Gianni the Greek last week, which was so good. I went 4-1 on picks. We're finally starting to turn it around a little bit after a very, very rough first half of the season, but week number 6, we started to get it back, and hopefully that momentum can continue here. But speaking of Gianni the Greek, my arch nemesis, you can actually join Gianni's Greek by joining as a member of my channel. I am trying to think of good things that I can add as a membership, but at the moment, you don't really get too much aside from emojis and access to all of my old live streams, but with time, I will definitely come up with better ideas to add to that. You can also get the 3-day free trial for the We Want Picks Premium membership over there by signing up with my code ARTEM. And now, with all of that being said, let's get into my picks for Contender Series week number 7 of 2023. So kicking off the card, we're going to have a men's flyweight bout between Igor da Silva and Jhonata Silva. And it's very interesting to note about Jhonata Silva. This guy has not been active whatsoever recently. He's fought twice in the last 4 years. He took on Stipe Miocic over there in Cage Warriors. He weighed in at 122 pounds for a 125 pound fight. Very, very small fighter for this weight class. He is 5'5", so he's not actually too short for the weight class, but he just doesn't have a lot of mass to him. He's a very, very thin guy, a very good striker, and you can tell that he's a very good striker. In my opinion, I actually think that he probably will be the better technical striker in the matchup. But one thing I noticed about that fight, especially against Stipe Miocic, was whenever Miocic committed to a takedown, he was able to get them pretty easily against Jhonata Silva, and I think that is going to play into Igor da Silva's game, because Igor da Silva, he is a pretty good striker himself, but in my opinion, he is an even better grappler. He does have a few submissions on his record, 4 wins by submission, and you will notice as well one thing about Igor da Silva, he is very, very young. He is only 20 years old. He made his pro debut in 2018 when he was probably only 14 years old, maybe 15 years old, so he has been a pro for a very long time. You know, he's been a pro since 2018. He's fought 7 times. He's actually fought some very good opponents. He took on this guy that was 9-1, won the Jungle Belt strap over there in Jungle Fight, and was the youngest fighter to ever win a title at Jungle Fight at the only age of 19. He has taken a year off, and you can assume that at his age, he's only been making improvements and getting even better. But I think it kind of just comes down to if Igor da Silva firstly goes for the takedowns, and if he gets the takedowns. And I do believe that Igor da Silva will go for takedowns, and I do believe that Igor da Silva can get takedowns against Jhonata Silva, who in my opinion showed pretty bad takedown defense against Stipe Miocic in his last fight, despite looking really good on the feet. He's also really small for the weight class. Igor da Silva is going to be a lot bigger than him, so I do believe that we're going to be able to see Igor da Silva go out there, out wrestle and out grapple Jhonata Silva. I think that we see Igor da Silva find a submission in this matchup over Jhonata Silva. So that's my pick, Igor da Silva by submission. This next fight is kind of fascinating to me. It's going to be Kaynan Kruschewsky taking on Dylan Mantello. And the reason why I find it so interesting is both guys are very weak in the same areas. In my opinion, both of these guys are pretty bad defensively. They both have pretty bad takedown defense, and they both have pretty bad striking defense as well. But in this matchup, I would say that Dylan Mantello is going to be the more technical striker. He actually is a pretty good technical striker, whereas Kaynan Kruschewsky has little to no technique whatsoever. I mean, this is going to sound really disrespectful, but you'll kind of understand what I mean when he does fight. Kaynan Kruschewsky's striking almost looks like he's just flailing his arms around. He doesn't have a lot of technique there whatsoever, but he does have power on the feet, and he is super, super aggressive, which is going to be interesting matching up against Dylan Mantello, who is the better striker in the matchup. The more technical striker just isn't quite as aggressive. But one thing that I do think could be a little bit of an X factor for Kaynan is the fact that he does go for takedowns, whereas Dylan Mantello, I haven't really seen too much grappling out of him in his fights. He did fight for Eagle FC a couple of times, took on Archie Colgan, who is a pretty good fighter, who has now gone on to have a lot of success over in Bellator. He responded with another win over Eagle FC and won the rematch over John Ramirez in a fight which I couldn't find the loss for. I don't really know what happened there. But he did recently beat Charlie Alexander. He did have a couple of troubles in that fight in the round number 1, but he was able to get it finished by his guillotine choke at the very, very end of the round. As for Kaynan Kruschewsky, he is kind of a grappler for the most part, but he does like to strike despite not being a very good striker. He does go for takedowns every now and then, but he isn't the most great offensive wrestler, if that makes any sense. But I do believe his offensive wrestling probably should be enough to get Dylan Mantello down to the ground. And another thing I will say about Dylan Mantello is he isn't a very great offensive wrestler himself. In fact, I would say that I don't see a lot of grappling out of Dylan Mantello at all, but it definitely is something that in his back pocket. I do believe if Dylan Mantello wanted to get Kaynan down, he probably could as well. I think this could just kind of go a lot of different ways, because I think that Dylan Mantello could knock out Kaynan Kruschewsky because he is a very sloppy striker. He leaves himself incredibly open. He doesn't really move his head too much, which will leave a lot of openings for Mantello there on the feet. But I do think that Dylan Mantello also lacks defensively his own right, so if Kaynan Kruschewsky does run forward, flailing his arms around, he could knock out Dylan Mantello. But I also think that he could get Dylan Mantello down to the ground if he needed to as well. And I think that's probably what he's going to do. I think that we're going to see Kaynan Kruschewsky just bomb forward, flailing his arms around, and gets takedowns over Dylan Mantello. I think that he's got more options in this fight from what I've seen on tape. So give me Kaynan Kruschewsky to defeat Dylan Mantello in this fight. This is a very low confidence pick from me. I'm going to be picking Kruschewsky by late submission, I think, even though both of these guys don't have the best cardio in the world. I have at least seen Kruschewsky go to the 4th and the 5th round recently. So give me Kruschewsky to win this matchup. It's a very low confidence pick, and if you're on the Dylan Mantello side, I totally understand. This is one of those fights I'm very interested to see who's going to be the favorite and who's going to be the underdog, because if Dylan Mantello is the favorite in the matchup, I honestly wouldn't be that surprised, but I am on the Kruschewsky side in this matchup. Very low confidence pick, but give me Kaynan Kruschewsky to win by submission in round 2 or round 3. This next fight is going to be a women's strawweight. It's between Talita Alencar and Stephanie Luciano, and Talita Alencar has taken this fight on relatively short notice. She is replacing an Italian fighter in Fabiola Padroni, who was meant to be Stephanie Luciano's original opponent, and you will see a pretty big age gap in between the two. Alencar is 33 years old almost, and Stephanie Luciano is 23 years old. One thing that Alencar does have is a very long BJJ sort of career, I guess you could say, because she did become a world champion at IBJJF a while ago, and she does have a lot of grappling matches. As you can see, she's managed to go 4-0 as a pro, and she does fight as you do expect, I guess, a former BJJ world champion coming over to MMA to fight. Her striking is still developing. I will say that her striking is not very good at all, and her wrestling is still developing, but it is still good enough for her to be able to get the opponents that she needs to down to the ground. But this is a big step up in competition for Talita Alencar. Stephanie Luciano may only be 23 years old, but she has fought a couple of good opponents. She took on a 5-0 opponent at Jungle Fight, a 2-0 opponent, and a 2-0 opponent in Michelle Oliveira over at LFA. Her one loss was to, again, a fighter with a winning record, so you can respect the level of competition that Stephanie Luciano has been taking on. One thing I will admit about this fight, my pick has switched. I was actually originally on Stephanie Luciano. I wrote my article picking Stephanie Luciano and saying why. And the reason why is because I thought that Stephanie Luciano was going to be able to defend the takedowns of Talita Alencar and beat Talita Alencar up on the feet. And that definitely could happen. It does just come down to whether or not Talita Alencar can get the takedowns in this matchup. And I'm going to say yes. Upon further analysis and upon looking into Stephanie Luciano a little bit more and talking to a couple of people as well that will be picking that will be picking Talita Alencar, Luciano does play into Alencar's game. What Stephanie Luciano does is when she strikes, her striking isn't the most technical, but it is pretty good. She is very aggressive. She crashes forward a lot and she crashes into the clinch a lot. And that is going to give Talita Alencar a lot of opportunity to take her down. Talita Alencar could duck under Stephanie Luciano as she's just kind of running forward and get taken down. Or Stephanie Luciano is going to rush forward, take the clinch. And then from the clinch, Talita Alencar could be able to maybe work for a position to get the fight down to the ground. Instead of Talita Alencar trying to bring the wrestling to Luciano, Luciano's whole style was going to bring the wrestling transitions and the grappling transitions to Alencar. That is what Alencar wants to do. I have switched my pick. That does tell you this is a low confidence pick, but I have told you why. It is because I do believe Alencar is going to be the much better grappler in this matchup. That kind of goes without saying, but it just comes down to whether or not she can get the fight down to the ground. And with the way that Luciano fights, I just can't trust her to not crash forward and get taken down by Alencar at some point. So I am going to be picking Talita Alencar. Very low confidence pick. I think that she might be able to get a submission over Luciano, but I'm just going to go with a very safe option. I'm going to pick Alencar by submission or decision, but I absolutely can see a world where Luciano does defend the takedowns and just outstrikes her for 3 rounds. But I'm going to go with Talita Alencar to win by submission or decision. And now we move on to the second 155-pound fight of the card, and just like the first one, this is another incredibly interesting matchup, and it's definitely one that I am looking forward to, because I think that we're going to see a lot of answers or questions answered about both of these fighters in this fight. You've got JaCobi Jones, who is 6-1. He's fought for LFA in the past. He's actually coming off a very, very impressive win over Jean-Paul Lebosnoyani in a fight which I actually did pick Jean-Paul to defeat JaCobi Jones, so I'll admit that I was wrong on that one. But JaCobi Jones, man, you see a lot of MMA media members very high on JaCobi Jones. Alex Bahunian in particular is pretty often talking about JaCobi Jones and how he thinks that he could make it far. I've seen MMA Junkie articles about JaCobi Jones and how they think that he's UFC level and all of this. But one thing I will say about JaCobi Jones that I do think does hold him back, especially at this weight class, is he's quite small for 155. He's 5'9", which isn't necessarily super short for the weight class, but it's not super tall for the weight class either. But he's not really like a big 5'9". He's not like a Volkanovski at 145 pounds. You know, he's a small dude. And I know that like someone like Shin Haraguchi's 5'6" at the weight class, but JaCobi Jones is not big for 155 at all, and I think that that could be an issue in this matchup against Daniel James Allen. One thing I am going to say about JaCobi Jones as well, which could be an issue in this fight, is his takedown defense is questionable. I've seen him taken down relatively often. His takedown defense looks pretty good against Jean-Paul Lebosnoyani, though. For the most part, I would say that he is a wrestler, but he kind of strikes more often than wrestles. Daniel James Allen, though, on the other hand, is a pure wrestler. The way that this guy fights is wrestling only. I haven't really seen him fight anyone that good, and another thing that I'm going to say is he just hasn't really fought often whatsoever. He's fought twice in the last 3 years. But the way that he does fight, I think actually could be very, very good in this matchup, because the way that Daniel James Allen fights is every single round, within the first 20 seconds of the round, this guy will shoot for a takedown. It doesn't matter if it's halfway from across the cage or up and close. Daniel James Allen will go in there with a wrestling mindset and try to get this fight down to the ground. You will see against Luis Vargas, he took a 2-4 opponent the distance. I think that's a big red flag, but if you do watch that fight, within the first 10 seconds of the first and second round, he shoots for a takedown and gets it super easily. I know it might not be that impressive against a 2-4 opponent, but he did look very good doing it. Completely dominated the fight. The third round rolls around and you see maybe like 20 or 30 seconds of striking out of Daniel James, and then he's going for another takedown. That's how he fights. You don't see a lot of takedowns, a lot of striking out of Daniel James. I think it's probably very fair to assume that JaCobi Jones is going to be the better striker in this matchup, but he hasn't fought often at all. But he does train at American Kickboxing Academy. I do think that there's definitely might play a part into why he's got the opportunity at only 4 pro fights into his career. I do believe he's pretty close with Daniel Cormier as well. I read about that online somewhere. Not really an official source, but I thought I'd bring it up. I'm going to actually be picking Daniel James Allen in this matchup. I think that Daniel James Allen is a bad matchup for JaCobi Jones. JaCobi Jones, as I said, is pretty small for the weight class, and he does have pretty bad takedown defense, and Daniel James Allen is very big for the weight class, and he's a very, very good wrestler training at AKA. He's going to have a lot of very good training partners as well to train his wrestling against, and I think it's just a bad matchup for JaCobi Jones. If Jones can keep this fight on the feet and use his wrestling to keep the fight on the feet, he should absolutely win this matchup, but I do believe that we're going to see Daniel James Allen go out there and get the takedowns and dominate from top position. Now, the problem with Daniel James Allen fighting style is if he does take JaCobi Jones the distance for 15 minutes with 14 minutes of control time, he probably won't get a contract unless it's like super dominant with ground and pounds. But I am going to be picking Daniel James Allen to win this matchup by decision or maybe a late ground and pounds TKO. I'm going to go with Allen here. He might be the underdog, but I just think it's a really, really bad matchup for Jones stylistically, but definitely is a matchup Jones can win. Going into tape, I completely expected to pick JaCobi Jones. After tape, I'm on Daniel James Allen, so give me Daniel James Allen to win this matchup by very late TKO or by decision. And now we move on to the main event, which is going to be at heavyweight between Shamil Gaziev and Greg Velasco. And I actually think that these two are probably some of the better heavyweight prospects that are not signed to a major promotion. And I will say especially Shamil Gaziev, and he is my pick in this fight. I think that the odds could be quite wide, and if they are, I think that definitely is something to keep your eye on, because I don't think that Shamil Gaziev is the perfect fighter. He does have a lot of flaws, and so does Greg Velasco. But to talk about Shamil Gaziev, Gaziev is a guy which really caught my radar when he took the win over Kirill Kornilov by split decision. It was a pretty close fight. Kirill Kornilov was 13-0 at the time and has gone on to have a couple of wins since. And then he took on Pavel Dalitko, knocked him out, and then he knocked out Darko Stosic. And when he knocked out Darko Stosic, that's when I knew that Shamil Gaziev was the real deal. I don't really know why he has to go through Dana White's Contender Series, because I do believe that wins over Kirill Kornilov and Darko Stosic are kind of all that you need to prove that you are UFC level, but he did do them anyway. Now he's taking on Velasco. Shamil Gaziev is a very good wrestler, and that's what he does, but he does strike probably a little bit more than you want him to, and his striking is not very technical at all. He doesn't move his head whatsoever, but what he makes up for with a lack of technique is a lot of power, man. Like, you watch this guy's fights, and sometimes you think that he hasn't even landed flush, and his opponents are getting KO'd. I think Darko Stosic isn't an example of that, because he hits Darko Stosic pretty hard to knock him out. But man, that was a good KO, dude. I was watching that fight, and although Gaziev did get hurt by Stosic, I was watching that fight against Darko Stosic. I was like, man, Gaziev is a really good fighter. Now, Greg Velasco, the problem with Greg Velasco is I feel like he's more of a wrestler grappler. He won't really be able to capitalize too much on Shamil Gaziev's weakness, which is that striking defense, because Velasco is not very powerful on the feet, especially for a heavyweight. He kind of is a grappler for the most part. He's a wrestler grappler, does have a pretty good BJJ base, and probably could maybe have the opportunity to lack up some sort of submission over Gaziev, but I don't think that we're going to see Greg Velasco be able to defend the takedowns against Shamil Gaziev, and then secondly, be able to punish Shamil Gaziev when the fight is on the feet. So I'm going to go with Shamil Gaziev. I think what he does in this matchup is have a little bit of success on the feet, then kind of rushes forward, gets a takedown on Velasco, gets into top position, and just rains down ground and pound, and wins this fight by ground and pound KO in the first or the second round. And I think that Shamil Gaziev, if he can work on some of those flaws that I did mention earlier, that striking defense, that striking technique, you could see Gaziev, in my opinion, go pretty far, because he is a very good wrestler. So give me Shamil Gaziev to win this matchup by first or second round TKO by ground and pound, but a KO on the feet is also likely as well. Give me Gaziev to win this matchup. I think he gets it done. And that is the card. It's going to be a hard card, in my opinion, to predict. As I did say, I think that this fight is incredibly close. I think that the women's fight is incredibly close. And I think that this fight is also incredibly close. And I have seen people picking Jhonata Silva as well, although I am relatively confident Igor Silva does get it done. But let me know what you think in the comments below. I always look forward to reading your comments. And now let's get into Contender Series 2023, week number 7.